Hi. My role is really to try and expand a bit on the question of the relevance of the OA debate for the social sciences in particular. All this talk of the future and mixed economies and gradual change puts me in mind of that line from the cyberpunk novelist William Gibson, who said, "The future has arrived, it's just unevenly distributed." And I think that's extremely apposite in this context. When we look at the scholarly communications debate, I think we need to step back a bit for a second and just look at the nature of the beast as it currently is constructed and where social science fits within that. So just to start off with a few facts and figures about the scale of the scholarly communications industry, when we focus on journal publishing in particular, there are something like 3 million articles submitted per year to something close to 30,000 peer-reviewed journals. About 1.5 million of those articles end up being published somewhere. They're published by something like 2,000 publishers. And those publishers range enormously from big commercial enterprises, independent publishers, large or small, university presses, learner societies. Janet Finch's reference yesterday to learner societies as though they're distinct from publishers, I think slightly misconstrues it. They are publishers, in fact, publish a lot of the prestige and elite journals that the scholarly community is dependent on. And obviously that's deeply relevant to today's agenda and to people in this room. So the machinery of scholarly communications is of that kind of a scale. I don't know how much peer reviewing that is to get those 3 million down to 1.5, but you can imagine a lot of interactions happening across disciplines, across regions on a kind of global scale. So where does social science fit into that? Well, roughly, of the 1.5 million articles that are published each year, and by the way, that output is growing by about 3% a year, around 10% are an HSS. A little over 10% are an HSS. Look at it through a different lens. If you think about the government money dispersed through the research councils last year, which was in the region of £2 billion, again, a little over 10% went to HSS. I think that those are very important contextual factoids to have in mind when we think about the nature of the OA debate and scholarly communications. HSS is a very small tail on a very big dog, and wag as it much as it likes, I'm not sure it'll make the impact, to use that much debated word, that it would like to have. It's incredibly important and valuable to see a gathering like this to try and tilt that balance back. And I think a lot of people in social science are particularly concerned about the fact that this debate is being swept along by the STEM disciplines, understandably, where OA has been well established and well embedded for a long, long time. There are very successful companies, Biomed Central, Hindawi, have been around for many, many years, publishing very successful open access journals. It's not controversial in biomedicine and life sciences to have an author-pays model being the dominant one. In social science, it's a very, very different story, and I think a lot of people are concerned about the lack of a natural read-across. I think the issue around that, the problem of that read-across, is further exacerbated by the fact that social sciences aren't one thing. If you look at the LSE typology, you'll see the range of disciplines with a chunk that sort of abut the STEM disciplines and often define themselves in those terms, where psychology might be an example. Another end of the spectrum where they abut more the humanities, where they're drawing on philosophy and history and so on, and then a lot of what they call core social science in the middle. So social science itself doesn't even necessarily converge on its own self-identity in such a way as to say what makes it different from STEM. So that's a very important thing for us, I think, to have in mind, because I think the nature of the open access debate has been very much about knowledge consumption, about unfettered access to information, as though that information is sitting there and needs to get into the hands of those who need it. But what it has obscured from view somewhat, I think, is a true understanding of the conditions under which that knowledge is produced in the first place, and that isn't one phenomenon. Knowledge production varies depending on the kind of knowledge it is. And I think, in a way, that's a profoundly social science question in and of itself, and be one that I think people in this room could engage with. So Now, I was very encouraged actually to have the reminder from Janet Finch yesterday when she said, part of the aim of what the no longer referred to as Finch report is about is really trying to achieve three things, not just access, but access along with sustainability and along with excellence. And I suppose that's where a lot of the concerns eventually converge, because sustainability and excellence in the social sciences have particular kinds of characteristics. So we as a social science publisher have been trying to engage with this one way or another in the last few years. We launched Sage Open, which is the kind of attempt to be a sort of a mega journal solution for the social sciences in a way that PLOS One has provided for the natural sciences. And in that process, trying to do a bit of learning by doing. But the other mode of engagement we've been involved in, and I want to sort of briefly report back on here, is surveying the vast range of academics, editors, learner societies on whose behalf we publish, to try and sort of pull some of those diverse voices together and get some understanding of what it is that are the predominant concerns in the social sciences. And that includes sort of detailed sort of focus group research where we've been sitting down with specific societies. And in fact, one of those contributors is in this room. We'll be hearing from Felicia Lavigne soon, and we were having meetings in DC, including with ARA and APS and ASA and various things, because it's not just a UK phenomenon, as people have emphasized. So what have we learned from that? Well, yes, there are some people who are kind of relieved and excited that there is an open access movement underway. But I would say that they represent a very, very small minority of the feedback we've had. Again, to quote Janet Finch again, yesterday she was saying that she has learned that it's a broad church with a few evangelical wings. I think it's true to say that broadly the evangelical wings are mainly STEM voices. And I think that it's a more sort of more cautious welcome that's arriving from the social sciences. Broadly, what we've heard, while there's been a small number of people expressing excitement, broadly we've heard two responses. Confusion, on the one hand, and concern on the other. And I'll come to the concern in a bit. The confusion is striking because I think it reflects the fact that this has been a STEM-led conversation. There was one little data point. The American Political Science Association have a major handbook they published 2 or 3 years ago on academic publishing, and they devoted a total of 2 pages out of 250 to open access. The conversation hasn't really penetrated into the social science disciplines in anything like a convincing way. It's really striking just how much people needed very basic explanation about the difference between green and gold, very basic explanation about the fact that it's not just vanity publishing, it's actually well established in the STEM disciplines and so on. But it was striking just how far the gap was in terms of immersion and knowledge. And actually things are moving on so fast, it may make little difference actually to even see that begin to change with the mainstreaming, as it were, of OA since the Finch report. But under the heading of concern, there was a blizzard of different kinds of issues that were raised, which I think we could try and sort of cluster under 4 broad headings. One about funding, one about sustainability, one about neutrality, and the last one about authority. Broadly, that's just clustering them. So the funding one is obviously the major and underpinning one, and obviously I've referenced the fact that the disproportionate funding that goes to different areas very much tied up and bound up with the idea of how the social sciences are valued generally and what does it mean that they are funded to the degree they are. We heard yesterday that there were that the NIH dispersed $29 billion of funding, to give you a sense of just where the scales of money tend to go in the scholarly system. I think even this year, there's been that move by Governor, now Senator Jeff Flake, to try and defund political science from the National Science Foundation entirely. So there's just an issue about just how the social sciences are funded de facto, and the fact that actually the way learner societies exist and thrive is based on the journal business. That's actually what they have. There aren't really many other sources. And then if you look at it from another angle, we did a case study of one of our society journals, a social science journal, which in 800 papers that it had received, only about 12% of those had any notional or identifiable funding at all. So the funding issue is radically different. On the question of sustainability, I think there we can pick up the topics that we've heard already about, half-lives and so on. social science works by being a dynamic stock of knowledge, as the LSE puts it, and they've got this three-year impact review that they're doing at the moment. This dynamic stock of knowledge relies on journals and relies on articles having been established and validated over time and potentially being re-engaged with over time. I was talking to one academic who was saying, yes, we're still mulling over what the true consequences of Ken Gergen's article, Social Psychology as History, published in a journal in 1972. The matter isn't yet settled. I think it's a really important way of looking at it to understand that sustainability, therefore, depends on journals surviving over time. Happily, even rather specialist or critical journals that are that are out now tend to survive, because once they've picked up enough of a subscription base, they tend to survive. Will that be the case for those minority journals in the future? So that was one of the concerns raised as well. And the third concern around neutrality was really to do with the fact that in STEM, people are used to the fact that the funders are one of their interlocutors, that actually they have to figure out how to make the knowledge claims in that context. That's not been the case so much with social science. There's been a heavy reliance on a concept of academic freedom. Now we're going to see the university step in as sort of key local funders, making their own choices about, well, is there a quantitative researcher deciding whether qualitative research is good enough to worth getting its bit of its budget? And even if the OU was working on that demand-led budget, as I think we were hearing, that could very quickly switch into, we've got to choose, and that's a tough choice. So it starts to change the dynamic of the relationship between the social scientist and the university. And then on the fourth point about authority, just a lot of concerns about the nature of how knowledge claims are built within the social sciences, about the extent to which prestige brands and journals are a crucial part of that the learned societies are a crucial part of that, and that even when it comes back to that point about vanity publishing, the idea of author pays may skew the actual selection base in an area where social sciences don't have such sort of rapid and solid convergence as you do in physics. Yes, 90% get published in physics, because physicists all agree that force equals mass times acceleration. Get 4 sociologists to tell you what power means, get 7 definitions. So it's a very different set of preoccupations about the nature of authority, which need to be borne in mind. So I will finish off then by just saying that this conversation has moved along so fast, it's accelerated so fast that the social scientists will have a potentially limited impact. However, it's incredibly important to see this forum and this venue start reverse that tide. I think the Academy is to be congratulated in actually trying to convene across a range of learner societies, a range of potentially siloed discussions, and to recognise the complexity of the issues. As, again, Janet Finch said, it's a complex ecosystem we're talking about here. And so a Harvard mandate saying you have to publish in open access doesn't necessarily mean that they'll hire people who publish in open access. So we need to be clear that we don't set up skewed incentive systems which ultimately undermine 2 of her 3 pillars. Think about sustainability, think about excellence, and what does that mean for social science? Thank you.
Thank you.